Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Earth Podcast by DGB Group. In today's episode, we're joined by Thomas Donia, the Technical Director at DGB Group. It was very interesting to learn how our projects are actually designed and implemented, and I'm excited to share that with you. But before we begin, I'd like to remind you that the Green Earth Podcast is a DGB Group initiative. DGB is a large-scale nature-based project developer, and our goal is to help nature flourish and prosper. If you want to learn more about our projects, please check our website, green.earth. The link is also in the description. But now, with no further ado, here's my conversation with Thomas Donia. Can you tell me a little bit about your work at DGB, exactly what you do, and how did you get into this? How did you get interested in this?
Sure. So I'm technical director at DGB. So what this means is essentially I'm ultimately responsible that our projects, right, that our operations deliver on what they should, right? So that involves overseeing the new project scouting, the project design, and the process of certification, right? The validation, the verification of these technical terms. And then most of our projects are multi-year projects. I mean, new project scouting, maybe 1 to 2 years, project setup, validation, design certification, maybe 1, 2, 3 years, but reforestation might go on for 30, 40, 50 years. So I'm also responsible for essentially what happens during that period, the MRV, the monitoring, reporting, and verification, to ensure that we do what we say that we do, right? That we do it right, that we evidence that as well, right? In the compliant ways, which allows us then to claim our products, right? Which could be a carbon credit, could be a plastic credit, it could be revenues of agricultural products, coffee, cocoa, and so forth. So that's essentially what I take care of.
Amazing. And did you always want to do this? Like, how did you get interested in this field of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm sure you get a lot of interesting answers from different people. The short answer is yes, right? So as a kid growing up, I was always studying nature. My friends would have their cupboards full of comic books and those sorts of things. And for me, it was always like nature encyclopedia, books about fish, all that sort of stuff. So actually recently I got a present from my mother where she had collected all sorts of old drawings and old essays and schoolwork from when I was really young. And it was all about whales and fish and plants. So I guess that was already always in there. But then somewhere along the line, I also started developing an interest in economics and in business. So that's eventually actually what I studied. I studied business science, some economics. And then, I went on to work, right, internationally in several companies. And at some point, right, I thought, look, I still have, and I've always had this interest, right, in nature, and I really wanted to explore viable setting up, designing viable, sustainable commercial models, right, to essentially to sustain or to rehabilitate nature. So I started looking for that, and ultimately that search led me to Selwyn and Hilda, right, of course, who are the founders of DGB, and that was at the end of 2021. We're now in 2025.
Oh, it's been quite a while. And how was that first conversation with Selwyn and Hilda? Were you already aiming to go to projects towards carbon credits, or was that an idea that came up later? How did that conversation go?
Well, I was looking for ways where I could essentially combine what I do well, process management, operational efficiency, and leading teams of specialists. I've led teams of specialists in different industries, in maintenance of medical equipment, IT specialists. Before I joined DGB, I was leading medical specialists who were involved in sterilization of medical equipment inside hospitals. So I've always enjoyed leading as I said, teams of technical specialists. Then I got in contact with Selden and Hilda, actually via one of these specialists that was actually working for me at the time, but it was also doing some work for Selden and Hilda. And it was their vision, right? They had envisioned carbon finance, specifically the finance part of the carbon markets, as a vehicle to be able to invest in nature commercially, right, and make this commercially viable. And they really sold me on it. I mean, I really bought into both that idea of the carbon finance, but also into their vision of what they wanted to achieve with the company. And that's actually where my journey started in terms of carbon markets and I know the work that we do now.
That's amazing. That's really interesting to hear because, as you said, yeah, everyone that answers that I asked this question to has a different answer. But at the same time, everyone also has kind of the same answer, which is, I like this, I like that, but I really like nature. I really love nature, or anything related to that. And I wanted to combine my expertise of the work that I used to do in the past into something that I really deeply cared about. So it's quite interesting to hear that everyone has a different story, but in the end, everyone has the same story, and that's really, really cool in my opinion.
Yeah, but you see, I mean, you also have to bring something to the table, right? Because
Definitely.
Somebody asked me recently, what would I need, to work with you guys? Like, what would I need to, I really like doing these things. And I said, look, and I think this was for some young people were asking me, and I think they were still in university or they just graduated. And I said, look, you need to bring at least one specialization, right? Because, and it can be something, I don't know, biological, ecological. It can also be finance, right? You can be a GIS specialist. You can be many different things, but it's more difficult to come on board as sort of a complete generalist, right? Because most often requirements in the work that we do require some specialist skills, right? It could be sales, right? It could be podcasting, right? It could be that we are starting to develop a project in country X, right? That has a very specific type of soil. Well, I need a specialist that understands that type of soil, right? With a very general business degree, it's not going to help me understand that particular soil structure, right? So yeah, I see what you mean. Everybody has sort of the same journey, but it only works out if you have something to bring to the table, of course.
Definitely. And on that note, what kind of challenges are you facing on a day-to-day basis that require specialists? You mentioned, for example, type of soil in a particular company, in a particular country. What are the challenges that you on your job have to fix, essentially?
I mean, we don't operate our projects in a vacuum, right? It's not like we have an empty space and we build something there. We're of course hugely, dependent and interdependent on, communities where we work, local regulation, local environment, and the choices that we make, right, within those different dimensions. So our projects are dynamic, right, and the space in which we work is complex, right? If we analyze a new project which we may, be interested in, or if we are working on the project design of a project, I mean, we have to balance, right, the economics of project development, costs, revenues, the risk, all those sorts of things, the timing of cash flows, the timing of investments, balance it with the needs of the stakeholders, right? All stakeholders have different needs. Stakeholder needs need to be met. If there isn't enough value in the project for the various stakeholders on board, well, then the likelihood of success, it just decreases, they may not all be the same, right? Incentives, right, that they're looking for. So we need to balance that, essentially that human dimension in our projects. And then depending on the type of projects, we also have to balance in the environment, whether it's climate or needs of certain species that do or don't grow well in a certain area, in a certain environment. And then when you start to balance those things out, you start to come up with questions like, does this particular tree species provide enough fruit, leaves, bark, and shade, right, for the communities in which and with whom we are working? And at the same time, does it generate enough expected carbon sequestration in order to make the economics work? Or should we change the mix of these species? And then what is the effect on all the different stakeholders? Should we, in this part of the project, solely focus on coffee, or should we diversify to coffee and cocoa because regulation may change in the future? So these are questions that of course we deal with in an environment which I was trying to say is dynamic. So to answer your question, what kind of problems are we faced with? Anything in that realm, right, of where these different elements of a project, where they interact, and also, again, communities as an example, species, but it could also be the type of cook stove or the type of coffee or these sorts of things. Where we collect plastic, for example, or where we don't collect the plastic, it needs to work, right, for everyone involved. And then you have a successful project, and this is also why we spend so much time in the project design, really trying to understand, what are the needs of all the different stakeholders. How can we design accordingly and make the economics of the whole thing work? Because then it makes the execution easier. I mean, of course, I can go on forever about interesting problems that we face. But that's really, most of it stems from and starts in the basic project design. Is really where we walk through, most of the feasible or even less feasible, let's say, project scenarios, and come up with all the different challenges that we may encounter.
That's really interesting. And yeah, I think that since you are overseeing the whole project operation, I think that the problems that the challenges that you deal with are essentially all of them, right? Because it's
yeah, they're all of them.
exactly. So it's pretty much everything. But you mentioned that the project design is a crucial part. How can you walk me through that process? Let's say, okay, I want to start a carbon project. I know there are different kinds of carbon projects we can talk about. So yeah, maybe we can start there. Tomorrow I want to start a carbon project. What is step number one?
Sure. Maybe just one extra note to your previous question, right, on the different challenges and problems you can encounter. Yes, I'm responsible, but of course, I don't have all the knowledge myself, right, to deal with all of these things, or the time, right, to deal with all these things on a daily basis or a weekly basis or whatever. Which, like in every organization, right, you need good people, right, which are in this case often specialists, right, to be able to either deal with the situation, right, or bring it to the table where we can discuss the challenge, the issue, the possibilities, the solutions, in order to deal with it, right? So, I mean, obviously you can't do it alone, right? If you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you got to go together, right? Yeah. So we have a good team. So that's what I was trying to say, because there's no way that I would be able to do this job without the team that's there in place. And we're always looking to expand, right? So if anyone listening here, right, feel free to go to our vacancies that are posted online, and because As I emphasized the need for good people, it also means that we're always looking for good people to join us. That's the HR objective that I received for this podcast.
500 people. And what kind of people are you looking for specifically? Do you have any specific specialists needed?
Well, as a matter of fact, we're looking for people who can design projects, right? You were saying, what does a project design process looks like or look like? Yeah, we're looking for people who can do that, for example, which means that you need to be able, and this is also more or less right, the process of project design. I mean, there is some kind of opportunity, and the opportunity comes from somewhere. It could be someone reaches out to us. It could be that we have encountered an opportunity, and we found this a feasible opportunity. Yeah, then you really. But feasible means we do a study, right? We do a desk study. We go on site. We calculate. We interview. We do some due diligence. But the real nitty gritty project design work is after that, right? So what we're looking for is people with a certain specialty, right? The specialty could be soil science. The specialty could be, having a background in biodegradable plastics, right? You could be a coffee specialist. There's many different routes and avenues to, let's say, to the start of such a role. Obviously, you need to have a healthy sense for curiosity, right, and common sense. I mean, there's interaction involved with regulators, with auditing companies, with standards. So you need to be comfortable with that sort of work. You need to be comfortable in articulating why you make certain decisions and how you bring certain evidence to the table for the statements that you make. So that sort of set of requirements usually, right, gets you to people with academic backgrounds, right? Because they're used to this sort of research, creating research, doing research, writing about research. But then the interesting thing is you also need to have some sense for the operational execution, because a nice project design, which is highly impractical to be able to execute, is of course, again, probably not going to be a very successful project for us. Again, the project design team isn't alone, right? Of course, right? We have the operational experts there, right? That continuously, of course, also support them during the project design phase, because what we don't want to do is design something and then later on, of course, we find out, right, this is too difficult to actually execute. That's of course a waste of everything. And then what happens is, you need to understand, as I was trying to say, what is driving the needs of the stakeholders that are involved in this project. The owners of the hotel chain who don't want their tourists to see that there is no waste management system, right? The collectors that are maybe in an informal sector and now have an opportunity to join a formal or a more formalized sector, privately managed in our case. We're talking about plastic waste, of course. A company that already may have some kind of infrastructure, but has some additional capacity, right? And we can partner to, for example, to finance an expansion of their production capacity, right? So they can recycle more plastic. So understanding all those different needs, taking all that into account, and then start working on the economics of the potential project design, together with the requirements from, let's say, the standard, and matching and starting to match those, right? Starting to make sure that they align, and at some point with the team, you've reached an aligned design, right? And when you've reached an aligned design, you can start your certification process, and you can start your essentially the production of your project in a simplified sort of explanation of what we do.
If I may digress a little bit from topic, and you mentioned a specific problem, which is deciding which farmers should join set program and set period of the year. I wanted to take a little step back from that and talk a little bit about the projects themselves, because I think that whenever people hear about reforestation projects, it's pretty much, oh yeah, European company goes to African country, buys a bunch of land and plants trees there, and then sells carbon credit out of it, and then comes back to Europe and drinks wine. So how are these projects? You mentioned that there are farmers that are partners, different farmers, different people, communities. How are these projects actually set up, and why did we take decision to move on that way? Isn't it easier just to buy a bunch of land and plant trees in it?
Well, again, it depends, right? It depends on the economics of that piece of land, right? Do you have the funding? Do you have the resources to manage it? What are the economics of then hiring people to manage it, right? What are their incentives to manage it? How do the neighbors of that piece of land feel? What does the government think? So it's often not that straightforward, especially not with larger projects. Of course, right? If you have your front yard, you can plant a few trees, but what we want to do, right, is we want to work at scale, because impact comes at scale. So we're not talking about somebody's front yard with 10 trees. We're talking about 10,000 hectares. And then, just buying 10,000 hectares and just planting trees there, the operational execution of that becomes a bit more difficult than just planting some trees.
Because I imagine not just the cost of buying those 10,000 hectares, but also it's not really just planting the trees, right? There is some management that needs to happen in that region.
Of course, because if you don't, let me put it this way. In large parts of East Africa where we work, most of the deforestation that happens is for domestic consumption, right? It is simply wood, fuel for firewood stoves. It is timber needed for the construction of your house, your shop, the bit of fencing around your farm to keep in the goats or the sheep. You can imagine the sort of domestic agricultural society consumption behavior, right? So this is not the government selling, large swaths of land, which you maybe have in South America, right? To create 100,000 hectare soy plantation or palm oil or these sort of things. So keep in mind that the natural behavior in this area is, we need to get our firewood. We go out, we get it, right? We make our charcoal. You can buy a piece of land, right? You can plant trees there, but that doesn't stop, right? The natural behavior of the encroachments of communities who need the wood for their basic needs for survival, essentially, right? I mean, no firewood, no fuel to heat up your food, no cooking, no disinfecting your water. So just buying a piece of land and planting trees, they'd be gone in a few years, right? So then there is no system of permanence to essentially maintain and keep in place that what you've planted. So then you start thinking, okay, how do I ensure that the normal cycle of taking down these trees, that cycle is broken deliberately in order to ensure that the trees remain where they are? Well, then I need to offer them something else, right? Then what can we offer them? And then, of course, you start really moving into all sorts of different lines of thinking about incentives, behavior, and needs. What can we do? So if we don't do that, and we've seen the examples. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples. Sometimes you drive through Kenya or Uganda, and you see projects that were created as an unwell designed, let's say, reforestation project, and there's nothing there because it's been cut, burnt out of anger, stolen, deforested, somehow didn't work, right? So it's really not that simple. I mean, the other side is you mentioned, maybe the perception of European companies or Western companies doing this sort of work in Africa. The recent there has been a recent focus, right, on for example, on cookstove projects, especially whether they deliver the carbon avoidance in this case that was calculated, that was promised, that anyway. And I always say, look, of course, we have to respect good science, right? So we also have to learn from it, not just us, but the entire industry. The industry does, because after, let's say, good research recently, the standards have updated some methodologies. The market has turned away from some of the, let's call them the worst sort of performing cookstove project, because they also have had progressive insight in that, it may not be worth the value that they have been paid for, and so forth and so forth. So there is movement, and that movement again just creates better quality projects. Of course, we always adhere to the latest standards and the latest methodologies, right? We don't fall back on older ones. So now, having said all of that, because I get the question a lot when we talk to investors, for example, or customers. So, look, when you implement this type of projects, and cookstove is a really good example of it, because for the farmer itself, right, or the household, I say farmer because they're typically, in the rural and agricultural areas, they don't feel the carbon avoidance, right, of the device that they are using. They are not quantifying, right, that carbon avoidance. However, they of course experience the socio-economic effects of that particular device on their daily life. So forget for a second the whole discussion, right, on is there overcrediting? Should we update the calculation? The whole carbon avoidance, sequestration, carbon crediting mechanism for a second. Then what is left? I just returned from Kenya a few weeks ago, and what is left is you have households who previously were cooking typically, we're talking 90% in these areas, over 90%, on open fires, right? The traditional 3-stone open fire is the way of cooking, right? In large parts of East and Central Africa, which has now been replaced by this free stove. Free, of course, if they decide to participate in a project, take good care of it, and use it, and don't sell it, and these sort of things. But it means that approximately 50% less fuel is needed to achieve the same cooking result. So what does that mean? Well, it means that either you buy your fuel normally, because you have other ways of having your income, for example. It means now you have 50% less expenses on your cooking fuel, right? It's just a straightforward saving because the result is the same. Or you gather the firewood. Everywhere you see people with big stacks of firewood walking around because they're gathering firewood. This means now that there's 50% less to gather, right? So either your trips are shorter, you go less often, you carry less weight, right? So it saves you either directly cash out expenses to save you money, right? Or it saves you time, which of course can be used for other things. Now those are very directly measurable, right? We have tests and surveys and these sorts of things, how we measure that. But then there's all sorts of other effects as well. I mean, we've measured the difference in particles, carbon monoxide emissions with the open fire versus this particular stove. I mean, the results are staggering. There's such a significant difference more on the traditional fire versus this stove, on how much more, harmful emissions these traditional stoves generate. And keep in mind that a lot of the cooking is done indoor, right? So again, I was in Kenya a few weeks ago with an auditor to do a performance verification, and the auditor was asking also some questions on this, and the people said, yeah, I have less irritation in my lungs, right? I don't tear as much anymore when I'm cooking, right? I don't feel sick so often, and it makes sense, of course, right? If you're, a couple hours a day standing in a very smoky area versus not so much, of course, it makes complete sense. Then, there were people saying, yeah, before, I also needed to make a fire inside my house when it was cold. So not for cooking, but for some heat. But this thing is mobile. And because of the insulation characteristics of the stove, after actually the fire is out, it still stays hot for some time. I take this and I take the warmth, let's say, into my bedroom, right, or to the living room, or whatever. Some of the households were saying, yeah, previously when I was cooking, I needed to stay there and manage the fire all the time, either for safety or because I needed to add more firewood because otherwise it would boil and so forth. Said now I can put a piece of firewood in, I can go do something else. So even during the cooking, I can now tend to, the laundry, or I can tend to some of the goats, or I can do other value-adding activities in the same time. So I save even more time, right? So the list of actually social economic benefits, right, out of this simple device is so much more than just the quantification of the carbon emissions that we quantify and fund, right, and sell. And so to your point, yes, Western companies are doing this. We are actually working also now with local investors, right? Also Kenyan investors. Of course, we have Kenyan partners. So it's not just us that sees the value, right, in this particular model. That value is actually seen now a lot more widespread and locally as well.
That's amazing to hear. And it's actually a bit of an answer of my next question, which would be regarding precisely what we say we have, which is high quality carbon units. And I think this is a very, very important aspect of it, right? Because as you said, if you just go down to Kenya, put on a fence around some land and plant some trees in there, it's not really, you have fewer guarantees that those trees are going to be standing 20 years from now. But if you're actively bringing that much benefit, I mean, I don't see this person that mentioned like has more time to do other stuff, doesn't have as much infection in the lungs, is not tearing as much. Why would this person go back to the old way of doing things? Right? They have more incentive to remain. So I think this is really, really, really interesting.
But Pedro, what you just said, right? There is no reason for this particular person in the example, right, to go back to the old ways. That is the outcome, right, of a successful project design, right? That is the outcome of the location design, the demographic analysis and selection, right? Where do we go? Which communities? To who can we deliver exactly the right amount of value? Because if we deliver the same cook stove to somebody who lives in Nairobi and who has access to, gas, for example, but likes the taste of some firewood, every once in a while, he doesn't get the value out of it. We don't get the value out of it. And ultimately, right, we find in something that we're economically not going to retrieve. So it's the result of a good product design, insulating capabilities, locally manufactured, economically acceptable to produce and distribute, having a good monitoring design, right, with the right amount of access into these demographically targeted communities, right? Um, all those things together, right, make the project design. And the outcome of all those things is exactly what you just mentioned. It's the very simple, why would I go back? Right? Now that I have this improved version, why would I go back to this? And now it seems so simple. I have this, why would I go back? But what you don't see, right, is that 2-3 year, right, project design process to get all those right things in place. What I was trying to say in the beginning, all the stakeholders, all the incentives, right, all of that together to reach the very simple conclusion, exactly as you just said. Why would I go back? Right? And the same should hold for every project, right? If we implement a plastic collection and recycling project in Sri Lanka, the answer should be exactly the same. For someone who is collecting plastic off the street for us or off a beach or whatever, they should say the same thing. Why would I go back to 2 years before when I had XYZ or didn't have XYZ? No, right? I'm getting value out of this new situation, which is so much more than before. So why would I go back? It's the same thing, right? In the example of, can we plant X amount of hectares somewhere in Uganda or Cameroon or wherever, in Kazakhstan, the stakeholders in the project should say the same thing. Why would I go back to the situation where I didn't have, this additional number of hectares of coffee planted or cocoa, right? Why would I go back? So again, it's you summarize it perfectly, what I was trying to say in terms of project design.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think it just comes back again to what we were talking about, entrepreneurship, because I think usually people think about an entrepreneur, that guy that learned how to sell something and just sells that stuff a lot. And essentially, it's pretty much what we're doing here, but we're not selling in exchange of money. We're selling in exchange of an attitude, right? The price that people have to pay in order to access this, because I'm pretty sure that they had to adapt in order to use the cook stove, or they had to adapt in order not to cut down the trees that they're not supposed to cut down. There are things that they are supposed to do in order to participate, right? That price has to be worth the outcome. So I think that's where also entrepreneurship comes in, because if what you're offering in return is, oh, look at this shade, and and that's pretty much it that you're offering, people are not going to stay very long for that. And I'm just flabbergasted of how interesting this is, because it's much, much deeper than just it has, of course, I imagine, a lot of science and environmental science, but it basically comes down to human behavior and psychology and incentives and communities. And that for me, that's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. And again, of course, we need to combine that with the environmental science, right? We need to combine it with selecting,
Of course,
the right species that will grow there, in a way that benefits us economically. So we need that social, economic, cultural expertise, right? We need the environmental expertise, and we need the economic and financial expertise inside a project in order to create a successful project design, right? And then, of course, we add operational expertise after, right? Or the focus shifts a bit more, right? After the project design, has been completed. Of course, the project design remains dynamic because things change, environments change, regulations change, people change, whatever. So we also have to accept that and be open to that, right? That shouldn't be too rigid, but the focus shifts more to the operational execution, and that's it. And I always say, it's I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but you know, Einstein said, you know, if I have an hour to come up with a solution for a problem, right? I spend 55 minutes defining the problem, understanding the problem, and then 5 minutes defining the solution. And or this quote was attributed to him, so I'm assuming it was his. But that is really also how we view this process of project design, right? If we don't understand what people need, right, where the request comes from, why they're asking for something, why they're doing something, then it makes no sense just to provide a solution without understanding where it comes from, because it may not be the right solution. And only the right solution, you know, will give us project permanence and will give us the return on investment that we're looking for.
Definitely. I love that quote. And did you ever ran into a situation where the people would come back and say, you know what, it's actually not worth it anymore. This is not working for us. And how did you deal with that? How did that ended up working out in the end, if it did?
Well, of course we do, right? For different reasons. I mean, there's many different reasons why people could say I'm not interested anymore, right? Maybe maybe they've made some money, they've moved to Nairobi, as in the earlier example, and they're not cooking on firewood anymore because they've been able to upgrade to natural gas. I mean, it's just an example, right? But there are situations that you can imagine whereby one of the underlying assumptions, in this case, the demographic analysis changes, whereby values and drivers change, whereby project participation is no longer so interesting for them, right? As an example. Another example could be, look, in Uganda, our project is focused also on chimpanzee conservation, right? We work in an area where there are populations of chimpanzees living in a human-dominated space and environment, meaning farms, roads, structures, instead of original forest. And we work with a local NGO who is really focused and has been focused for many years on chimpanzee conservation. Well, you can imagine a scenario where there's a human-wildlife conflict, right? Chimpanzees are wild animals. You know, they're strong and highly intelligent, and there is conflict with humans and wildlife. And you know that we are on the one side trying to do also conservation work as part of our project, but you have a human-wildlife conflict. You can imagine how then people affected by this conflict may not be so prone anymore to participate in the project because they just got attacked, right? So why would I want to conserve it? So, you know, those are delicate situations, right? And but again, you have to come up with solutions. And in one of these particular examples, there was the local team of the NGO came up with a brilliantly simple solution, but that stems out of the knowledge that they have about the environment of chimpanzees and so forth. There was a situation where there was a remaining patch of forest where chimpanzees rested, slept, overnighted. I mean, I'm talking about 1 hectare, maybe less than 1 hectare. Like that's the size we're talking about in this particular area. And they would cross the road. It's actually the exact road that you see in the latest BBC Earth series, where you see them crossing the road. It's those chimpanzees, and it's that location. They were crossing the road to the other side because there was sugarcane plantation there, and chimpanzees apparently have a very similar palate to humans, so they liked the sugarcane. They were destroying the farmers' crops, which you know, is not ideal when you want to build these sort of projects. So the local team actually had come up with a solution where they rented a space on the other side of the road, and they planted the sugarcane there in a very small area, just for these animals to feed on. And they stopped crossing the road, and they stopped you know, chasing the crops on the other side. So great example of their, out of the box thinking and entrepreneurship. Yeah, but of course these things happen. And going back to your question, how do you deal with it? Look, ultimately, this is also something that, I say to investors is, how do we deal with risk? I mean, that's essentially the question, right? Because, okay, how do we deal with this situation? How do we deal with that situation? You could have also asked me, how do you deal with fire, right? How do you deal with a new type of pest, right? How do you deal with drought? And, simply said, it's all about diversification, right? If I look at, DGB at a group level, we have different types of projects, right? In different parts of the world, with different methodologies, different standards, different agricultural products, different supply chains. Even within a country, right, we might have different projects. Even within one project, right, we work across different regions. So if we have drought in Laikipia, it may not be the same order of magnitude in Nye, for example, in Kenya, right? Even within the county, all the places where we plant with the farmers, they're not all neighbors, right? So if there's some conflict in this area of the county, the others are probably not as much affected. So if we have a fire, then 3 out of the 300 areas in that or plots in that area may burn down, but it means that 297 are not affected, right? And the same holds for the fire, pests, all these sorts of things. So the diversification and the portfolio approach really is designed to mitigate most types of risk, right? So if in one project the compliancy with farmers turns out to be less, okay, that's not good, right? But of course, part of that is built in. We don't expect 100% of all farmers to remain compliant for the complete term of the project. Of course, we're not telling the individual participants this, but the project should be feasible at 80% or at 70%, right? It should be robust enough to withstand these sort of environmental impacts, non-compliance, government impacts, geopolitical impacts, and so forth. Because that, on a whole, right, makes our group of projects and our business group robust in terms of how do we deal with risk. And this is also something that we can explain, right? Yeah, we diversify our portfolio. I mean, it makes sense. So the short answer is yes, this happens, right? what you assume happens, and this is how we deal with it.
Amazing. So, well, we've been talking for a while. It's been a great conversation. And if we could, that would pretty much just take your whole day with more questions. But I actually just have one more that I would like to ask you, which is, you talked a lot about project design. And I think that for the future, we can see a lot of things changing. I imagine you already saw a lot of things changing, new technologies that we can use, or, new methodologies that are updated. But in the project design field, what are you excited about in the future? And what can you envision? Like, what would be the future project that you would like to be a part of the design of?
Well, I think, to answer your first question, I think there will be a lot more, there will be innovation and a lot more applicability and economic feasibility of different measurement tools. And if we can measure better, again, the confidence in the industry, grows. There's a concept called dynamic baselining, which has been recently introduced by Vera, where we don't keep a baseline static, but we sort of continue to reevaluate it. Those sorts of innovations are ongoing. Of course, digital MRV monitoring, digital reporting. So, in any case, I'm excited about that because it's just interesting, it's necessary, and it's happening. I think from a personal point of view, we've started piloting some biodiversity projects, and yeah, those I find really interesting because we use finance, climate finance, biodiversity finance, whatever you want to call it, in order to essentially transfer that finance from A to B, where B is an area where we protect, enhance, restore biodiversity. Being able to take a baseline of a biodiversity score of X, which consists of this volume, this species, taxonomically different species, whatever. And then implement your project, and then 10 years later, 5 years later, you have hopefully an improvement, which means you have such quantifiable impact of your dollars spent on nature. That I would find that very satisfying.
Amazing. Awesome. That sounds exciting. Awesome. Well, Thomas, thank you so much. Do you have any final thoughts, any final things that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Check our website for open positions. As I said, we're always in need of good people. We're always in need of good specialists, good salespeople. It's updated all the time because we are also growing. We're also expanding. We're doing new projects. So what's on there today might be different from 2 or 3 months from now. So keep an eye on that and follow this podcast, right?
Definitely.
Was I supposed to say that?
Oh, it definitely helps. So thank you for that. But Thomas, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing all these insights with us. It's been a very, very productive conversation, and I hope that our listeners thought about that as well. And yeah, you're welcome to come back to the podcast whenever you want, man. I'm pretty sure that we can spend another hour or two talking about various things.
Maybe next time we can do it from the field. You can see me in my field gear.
That would be exciting. Thank you for joining us today. The Green Earth Podcast is a DGB Group initiative. DGB is a large-scale, nature-based project developer, and our goal is to help nature flourish and prosper. If you want to read more about our projects, please check our website, green.earth. The link is also in the description. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving us a review. And if you know anyone that might benefit from this content, we'd greatly appreciate your recommendation. I'm Pedro Zimmer, your host, and I hope to see you for the next episode of the Green Earth Podcast.